Treaty of Jeddah, diplomatic engagements and negotiations with regional powers, including the British, to secure recognition and support. The signing of the Treaty of Jeddah in 1927 and its significance in establishing Saudi Arabia as an independent. In 1902, Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud took control of the city of Riyadh, which became the new Saudi capital. The Ibn Saud family had been driven out of what is now Kuwait by the Al-Sabah family in the late 18th century. They sought refuge in the nearby oasis of Diriyah, where they built a small empire, based on raiding caravans that passed through the area. Abdul Aziz turned his attention to the Al-Sabah family in Kuwait and, with the help of the British, succeeded in driving them out in 1913. He then turned his attention to the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the Arabian Peninsula. The Ottomans had been in decline for some time, and the Saudis saw an opportunity to expand their territory. In 1915, the Saudis signed a treaty with the British that recognized Saudi sovereignty over the Arabian Peninsula. The British were interested in having a friendly power in the region to counter the Ottomans and the Russians. In 1917, the Arabs revolted against the Ottomans, with the Saudis playing a key role. The Arabs were successful in driving the Ottomans out of the Arabian Peninsula. In 1927, the Saudis signed the Treaty of Jeddah with the British, which won diplomatic engagements and negotiations with regional powers, including the British, to secure recognition and support. 2. The signing of the Treaty of Jeddah in 1927 and its significance in establishing Saudi Arabia as an independent. 3. The stipulations of the Treaty of Jeddah and how they benefited Saudi Arabia. 4. The importance of the Treaty of Jeddah in relation to other treaties signed by Saudi Arabia. 5. The reaction of the regional powers to the Treaty of Jeddah. 6. The implications of the Treaty of Jeddah for the future of Saudi Arabia. 7. The significance of the Treaty of Jeddah in the history of Saudi Arabia. 1. Diplomatic engagements and negotiations with regional powers, including the British, to secure recognition and support. In order to ensure its independence and build diplomatic relations, Saudi Arabia needed to secure recognition and support from regional powers, especially the British. Early diplomatic engagements focused on convincing the British to recognize the kingdom and end their protectorate over the Emirate of Najd and Sultanate of Hale. In December of 1922, Ibn Saud met with the British High Commissioner in Baghdad, Sir Percy Cox. During their meeting, Ibn Saud argued that the British protectorate over Najd should be ended and that he should be recognized as the king of all Arabs. Sultan al-Amin of Hale also met with Cox in Baghdad to discuss the recognition of his rule. Although the British were initially reluctant, by February 1923 they had decided to drop the protectorate over Najd and Hale and to recognize Ibn Saud as the king of Najd and Hale. Recognition from the British was a significant step in the establishment of Saudi Arabia. But more work was needed to convince other regional powers to recognize the kingdom. In March 1924, Ibn Saud negotiated the Treaty of Mecca with the Hashemite Emir of Mecca, Abdullah ibn Hussein. The treaty recognized Ibn Saud as the king of Najd and Hale, and Emir of Mecca, and confirmed the boundaries between the two territories. The treaty also established the unequal relationship between the Saudis and Meccans, with the Saudis having primary responsibility for the defense of Mecca and Medina. In order to gain further recognition, Ibn Saud negotiated the Treaty of Jeddah with the British in 1927. The treaty recognized the independence of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and defined its boundaries. In return for British recognition, the Saudis agreed to protect the Red Sea coast from pirates and to allow the British to maintain a small military presence in the country. The treaty also granted Britain's preferential treatment in trade and commerce. The signing of the Treaty of Jeddah was a significant milestone in the establishment of Saudi Arabia. It not only secured British recognition and support, but also set the boundaries of the new kingdom and established it as an independent state. 2. The signing of the Treaty of Jeddah in 1927 and its significance in establishing Saudi Arabia as an independent. In 1927, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was officially established with the signing of the Treaty of Jeddah. This treaty was a diplomatic engagement between Saudi Arabia and the British Empire, in which the British recognized Saudi Arabia as an independent state. The treaty was signed in Jeddah, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and was a key moment in the country's history. The significance of the treaty was that it established Saudi Arabia as an independent state, separate from the British Empire. This was a significant achievement for the Saudis, as it affirmed their sovereignty and independence. The treaty also allowed for diplomatic relations and trade between Saudi Arabia and the British Empire. This was an important step in the development of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. 3. The stipulations of the Treaty of Jeddah and how they benefited Saudi Arabia. The Treaty of Jeddah was signed in 1927 between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the British Empire. The treaty recognized the sovereignty of Saudi Arabia and its independence from the Ottoman Empire. The treaty also outlined the spheres of influence of each country in the Arabian Peninsula. The stipulations of the treaty benefited Saudi Arabia by establishing it as an independent state and ensuring its territorial integrity. The treaty also resulted in the recognition of the Wahhabi sect by the British government. 4. The importance of the Treaty of Jeddah in relation to other treaties signed by Saudi Arabia. In the modern world, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a key player in the Middle East. The country wields significant economic and political clout in the region. Consequently, the Saudi government has had to sign a number of treaties and diplomatic agreements with other nations in order to protect its interests. The Treaty of Jeddah is just one of the many such agreements that the Saudis have been party to. The Treaty of Jeddah was signed in 1927, between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the British Empire. The treaty was significant as it recognized Saudi Arabia as an independent state. This was a major breakthrough for the Saudis, as it granted them a level of international legitimacy. The treaty also established diplomatic relations between the two countries. This was an important development, as it opened up communication channels between the Saudis and the British. In terms of its impact, the Treaty of Jeddah was hugely important for Saudi Arabia. The treaty allowed the Saudis to project their power on the international stage and to gain recognition from other nations. The treaty also set the precedent for future agreements between Saudi Arabia and other countries. The Treaty of Jeddah was a key step in the formation of the modern Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. 5. The reaction of the regional powers to the Treaty of Jeddah. Following the signing of the Treaty of Jeddah in 1927, the regional powers reacted in a variety of ways. Some, like the British, were quick to offer recognition and support to the newly independent Saudi Arabia. Others, such as the Ottomans, were initially more hesitant, but eventually came to accept the change. Still others, such as the Persians, opposed the treaty and the independence of Saudi Arabia from the very beginning. The British were generally supportive of the Treaty of Jeddah and the emergence of an independent Saudi Arabia. The British had been engaged in diplomatic negotiations with the Saudis for some time, and had already treaties in place governing issues such as navigation and trade. The Treaty of Jeddah built on these existing agreements, and also granted the British government certain rights in Saudi Arabia, such as the right to protect British subjects and to maintain a consular presence. The Ottomans, on the other hand, were initially more hesitant in their response to the Treaty of Jeddah. The Ottomans had, for centuries, been the dominant power in the region, and the idea of an independent Saudi Arabia was a major change. However, the Ottomans eventually came to accept the new reality, and even entered into a number of agreements with the Saudis, such as the exchange of diplomatic missions and the training of Saudi students in Istanbul. The Persians, in contrast, opposed the Treaty of Jeddah and the independence of Saudi Arabia from the very beginning. The Persians saw Saudi Arabia as a dangerous competitor, and feared that the Saudis would try to destabilize the region. The Persians also opposed the British presence in Saudi Arabia, and saw the Treaty of Jeddah as a way for the British to gain a foothold in the region. 6. The implications of the Treaty of Jeddah for the future of Saudi Arabia. The Treaty of Jeddah was a major turning point in the history of Saudi Arabia. It established the country as an independent nation and signaled a new era of diplomacy and engagement with the outside world. The treaty also had far-reaching implications for the future of Saudi Arabia. The most immediate consequence of the treaty was the recognition of Saudi Arabia by the British government. This was a major coup for the new country and ensured its place on the world stage. The treaty also allowed for the development of trade and other economic ties with the UK and other nations. In the longer term, the Treaty of Jeddah helped to solidify the position of the Saudi royal family. The treaty was seen as a major achievement of the ruling Al Saud dynasty and helped to legitimize their rule. The treaty also cemented the UK's role as a key ally and protector of Saudi Arabia. This relationship would prove crucial in the years to come, as Saudi Arabia faced various challenges and threats. The Treaty of Jeddah was a significant milestone in the history of Saudi Arabia. It marked the country's emergence as an independent nation and signaled a new era of diplomacy and engagement with the outside world. The treaty also had far-reaching implications for the future of Saudi Arabia, helping to solidify the position of the Saudi royal family and cement the UK's role as a key ally. 7. The significance of the Treaty of Jeddah in the history of Saudi Arabia. The Treaty of Jeddah was signed in 1927 between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the British Empire. The treaty was significant in several ways. Firstly, it recognized the independence of Saudi Arabia. Secondly, it established diplomatic relations between the two countries. Lastly, it allowed for the free movement of people and goods between the two countries. The treaty was a direct result of the diplomatic efforts of King Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud. He had been working to secure recognition and support from regional powers, including the British, for several years. The signing of the treaty was a major step forward in his efforts to establish Saudi Arabia as an independent state. The treaty was also significant in that it marked the first time that the British had recognized the sovereignty of an Arab state. This was a major shift in British policy in the region. Until this point, the British had been trying to maintain their control over the Arab states through their policy of divide and rule. The treaty was an important step in the history of Saudi Arabia. It established the country as an independent state and paved the way for its future development. The Treaty of Jeddah was a significant step in establishing Saudi Arabia as an independent state. It ensured recognition and support from regional powers, including the British, and legitimized the kingdom in the eyes of the international community. The treaty also allowed for the free flow of people and goods between Saudi Arabia and its neighbors, which facilitated trade and increased investment in the kingdom.